Hello, JD Walter. Hey, welcome.
Dave Hill, so good to hear your voice. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you. We met at Centrum at Port Townsend a couple years ago,
That's right.
and it was like kismet. You're a drummer at first, and then you became a vocalist.
I was
Felt
both decided to say you can't be the jack of all trades. Let's
Mhm.
see what happens if you just put everything into one.
Yeah, and you were just going to some little music school that I guess turns out a lot of incredible people. North Texas, wasn't it?
Yep, some little
Yeah,
music school. Yeah,
yeah, that churns out a lot of badass musicians. So,
it'll
yeah, so
eat you up.
yeah,
It'll
it'll
eat
eat
you up.
you. Yeah,
You're being
but you learn.
facetious, right? It's
Yeah.
it goes back and forth between Indiana and North Texas as the largest music school.
Yeah, and we talked about how we both knew Matt Chamberlain and met other great drummers there, and you were like, "Wow, this is," and then you'd be really focused on voice. I'm a drummer for like 40 years, but then I have started becoming a singer-songwriter, and so I
Right.
that rhythmic thing I think plays out a lot in the way I sing, and I'm sure the way you sing.
It's a rhythmic based art form. Any pop, R&B, hip hop, jazz, gospel, blues, rhythmic based art form. So absolutely.
So one of the reasons I reached out to you was we had a great connection there at Port Townsend, and also you have a new voice coaching platform. So tell us about your new vocal jazz course.
Yeah, so like any teacher, what's the impetus to write a book? You're teaching students and you jot down an exercise for them to do. Then the next student comes, you write down a different exercise, or you have to write down the same one. You say, I don't feel like writing it again. So you Xerox it, whatever it is. And then after years of being a teacher, you eventually have a little book. So I had written a book in 2012 that I was selling to students. But then with the advent of everything we can do with computers these days, I created a platform in conjunction with another company called Genius Jam Tracks, which is a polyrhythmic play along. They have it on desktop now. And so the book now has playable notation. You can practice along to the exercises on Genius Jam Tracks. So you have a live band to practice things with. Now you can change the tempo, you can change the key, you can do all sorts of things. And you can also put videos in a platform versus a book. You can't put videos in there, but and also
Okay.
you can edit and add. And so
Right.
yeah, it
So,
goes from the beginnings of theory and harmony and rhythm all the way to advanced reharmonization, arranging, and that type of thing. So
awesome. And who do you imagine is the course for primarily jazz vocalists, or who's the right person for this course?
the more I think about it, it's for any musician, period. Because one thing that is always rattling around in my brain now, aside from the technical aspects of being an instrumentalist in dealing with the specifics of the instrument, it's all music happens inside the head. So
Mhm.
you can tell, and this is something that happens with the development of any soloist or musician, is that if they become very licky, or if they're playing a lot of licks, if
Mhm.
they're copying things from other people, it's not theirs. And so they're just kind of, or they transcribe a lot. They're just regurgitating patterns with their hands or whatever it is. But if you can sing something and it's coming from your head, it's almost you're telling the truth.
Right.
You can't
Right.
lie about I meant to do that or I didn't mean to do that, but you can with an instrument. You can move your fingers, and that's not. And we had this conversation before about
Yeah.
intention. Do you mean to do something? And so in this instance, the book would be great for any musician, but
Right.
it is geared towards singers
Mhm.
because we have a different set of challenges with our instrument. We have no buttons to press to reinforce ideas or patterns or whatever it is. But yeah, it's pretty much for any musician starting from zero. I would say it's probably an advanced 2-year collegiate course.
Okay.
But you
Yeah.
can start from zero. You can
You
start
can
from
start from
zero.
zero, but yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, I definitely checked it out, and it's like, it's great. I can imagine for folks who are just getting started, it's helpful, but it really goes. I mean, you're such a deep artist, and you will talk more about some of your philosophies about art and art making art, but it's you have some really advanced concepts in there that take it to a an expert level, artistic level. I mean, really at this point, working
And
on
you know what?
mastery.
You know what, Dave? I appreciate that you call them expert or high level, but I think a lot of these traits or ideas are things that should be ingrained into the musician from a young age,
Right.
And maybe it's just that people are seeing these things for the first time now because however they came to the platform. But these are like concepts that all kids have and then lose, and then we're trying to regain them back again.
Yeah. It's interesting. We had a talk, we had a sidebar at the camp I know about reharmonization, for example,
Hmm.
and you have some really cool concepts and approaches to reharmonization. I think of that with like my musician buddies that sometimes when you start talking about reharmonization, people's eyes can kind of glaze over. I know
Right,
mine have at times for sure. I'm
right.
getting more into it and I'm less intimidated now, but at the same time, music theory is sort of this interesting, sometimes like a separator. People are like, well, more music theory, too much music theory. What's
Right.
the right amount? I'm curious, what would you say about that?
Well, the great thing about music theory is that it's finite information. Theories are infinite, but music theory is based on a finite amount of information. The
Okay.
learning curve is you have to understand what an interval is. You have to understand the basics in music, how to construct chords. And then beyond that, you can go really, really far.
Hmm.
You can go
Hmm.
really, really
Right.
far. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Beautiful. So at the camp, you also did this great workshop on creativity. I think it was like, what is creativity was the theme. And maybe just say a few words about like, what is creativity?
I think the lecture was imagination and intention.
Oh,
I think
okay.
that it's related because imagination is part of creativity,
Mhm.
and I think you calling it that doesn't detract at all from what I'm trying to say because creativity is the practice of imagination.
Okay, I think that was
Right.
the phrase that was in my head. Yeah, creativity,
Maybe.
the
Yeah.
practice of imagination. I'll let you talk about how do we practice our imagination, JD?
Yeah, it sounds kind of woo-woo at
Yeah.
first. And as I alluded to before, these are things that all kids have, and then it's kind of beat out of them to some degree. But how would we practice imagination with music per se? In the practice room, I'm practicing imagination with individual songs that I'm learning. In jazz, we are performing standards. So I would be taking that song and I would be imagining how a country singer might sing it. I would imagine, and then of course that forces me then to look at the nuances and what are the defining characteristics of a country singer. I would then maybe try and sing it as a reggae singer. What are the defining characteristics of a reggae singer, right?
Mhm.
So I'm exploring different methodologies or different genres and then applying it as I see it. And so this is a type of imagination. Or how would Pat Metheny play this solo? Or how would Michael Brecker play this solo? Or how would and on and on
Yeah,
and on, this
right,
type
right.
of
Yeah,
thing. That
I like
this
that.
is an example. But if we think about it deeper, all arranging or writing music, for example, how do I imagine something happening? What could happen when we start imagining possibilities? What do I hear next? That's a practice of imagination.
Mhm.
What chord do I hear next? And of course, when we're writing music, oftentimes we get caught in what a professor of mine called stop time, where we get to a spot and we say, "Oh, that's not the right chord. Let me go up to it again. Oh, that's not the right chord." And then I learned to put a placeholder chord there and say, that's not the right chord, but I'm not going to let this stop me from continuing on with the process of imagination, which is where can this go? What could be next? And
I
then
love
we
that.
get down to kind of combining the two worlds of imagination and theory, as it were. So we get done with playing with the imagination part and we say, wow, this is a great idea. Is it the best possible incarnation of that idea? And then we go through and maybe spot check different things and say, if we're talking about theory as it relates to what we've written, oh man, my melody note is on the fifth here and it feels kind of static. Or my melody is on the root of the chord, it feels kind of static. What other chord could take its place that is related diatonically, which means all substitutions first and foremost come out of common tone chords. So we have the relative major and the minor, basically any chords that share tones in common. So we check out those and we say, oh, that's kind of a nice thing that fits in. And oftentimes this kind of thinking leads us to augmenting even more of what we're writing. But it's playing. It's playing with composition just as much as we say, I play music. We don't say I work music. We say I play music. It should be fun. It should be a joyous, let me try this
Yeah.
out.
What's interesting is it's like it's different than practicing in the traditional sense of how we might think of practicing, where people think, "Oh, I'm going to learn this rudiment," or I'm going to
Mm,
learn this vocal scale, or I'm going to learn this. I'm going to work my technique, my break,
right.
or I'm going to work on my head voice, or whatever it might be. It's like saying, "I need some dedicated time," or I'm going to spend some time. I know you do spend a lot of time playing with your imagination as and exercising your imagination.
Right.
Would that be true? I'm sort of
Sure.
supposing.
But again, getting back to this word playing music, there are some people, I've heard some people speak about it. Victor Wooten, he says he just puts on records and plays along with records.
Right.
There's no he's not necessarily sitting down and going, working as he's not getting down to that's not fun for him. That's not play.
Right.
That's work. He would rather play. And some people can become amazing at that. That's all
Right.
they do.
Right.
There was a
I know
bassist that
musicians like that too. Yeah.
yeah, there was a bassist that I grew up playing with named Hassan Al-Shakur, played with Ellington in the Ellington band for a long time, Monty Alexander. But the amazing thing about him was when he would take solos, he would go from one quote to the next quote to the next quote to the next quote. And all you could think of, how does this guy do this? How does he, and when I say quote, he's playing maybe, a commercial that everybody knows, or he's playing a bit of a song that everybody knows. He's playing, nonstop, like over and over again. How does he do this? And he says when he used to practice with the TV on, and he would play during the commercials. And so he would hear all of these, common things. But I think that leads to getting to know the instrument more organically, because now he's playing what he hears. He's not playing what someone has said is on a piece of paper, which is, of course, how we want to learn music, more of an organic way, like the Suzuki method, where children learn first to play what they hear before someone sticks notes in front of them. Which is so important. And that's the problem I see at university or education level, where it's all about shoving music in front of people. And then people aren't really in touch with their instrument, because really their instrument is their mind. And they can't make that transference of what's in their mind to their instrument. And if you can't do that, then how can you mean what you say? And that leads to intention.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. What's the Jaco Pastorius quote?
If you think, you stink.
There you go. I love it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So another lovely part of your lecture that tickled my drummer heart was you talking about Billy Hart. And I know you tour all the time with different folks, and quite often I think you've toured with Billy Hart as your drummer and done
not quite often,
shows.
but yeah.
Oh, okay. I'd love to have you retell some of that Billy Hart lore.
So I was trying to figure out what it was about Billy Hart that drew me into his playing, because as a drummer, I was able to kind of see that he was a little sloppy with his technique as far as like a rudimentary drummer is concerned. Things weren't quote clean, but the cleanliness was irrelevant. I'm still trying to figure out what is it? Why do I love what he does? Why do I see this man just playing a swing pattern and it touches my heart? And so now I'm trying to boil it down. Okay, so I'm trying to dissect this, and I say, okay, Billy Hart plays on the ride cymbal and it does something to me emotionally, and I break it down further, and okay, a man has a stick and he's hitting a piece of metal and I am moved. And what is that? And so the only conclusion I could come to was that there's intention behind what he's doing. And then I had to understand what that meant. Now, while we were on the road, one of the clubs wasn't paying as much as he needed for his per diem, and I asked him if he would take a master class at a local university in Philadelphia it was, and he said yes, where the students were asking ridiculous questions, or so I thought, but him being the gentleman and also a very thoughtful person was answering these questions, which further answered my quandary of what makes Billy Hart tick. And so there was a ridiculous question that I know that was asked, what would you do if you won $1 million? Which Billy Hart replied after he thought for a second, me thinking, oh, I'm embarrassed. These kids are asking these questions. He thought hard about it. And he said, I would take time off the road and I would practice more. And another question was, what do you do when you're a drummer and you're bored on the bandstand and looking around? And he said, that's a good question, which I thought was a terrible question, but he said, that's a good question. I would probably try and go to more museums, watch more art films, read more books, get in touch with myself. Who am I? The life experience, and bring that to the bandstand, because that's the bottom line, bringing your life to the bandstand. So there it is.
I'm speechless again.
Yeah.
Such a great.
You can't do it. You can't do it and there are some cats where you hear, and I'm not going to mention their names because I still have respect for them in some fashion, but there were some players I knew of. There was a drummer in particular who said before he came to New York, he practiced 15 hours a day for 3 months. And then he got the chick gig, right? And now, so I really respect Dave Weckl, but Dave Weckl's not my favorite drummer because he doesn't have that emotional content. What an amazing technical player he is.
Yeah, right.
But, you spend all that time in the practice room, you haven't lived life. And I'm not saying that's what happened and he never lived life, but that could be an example or a result. of
No,
all
I
you do
think
is get.
it's a great point though, and we've all heard players, and it's also maybe even like at a certain time period in their career, like where it might be at that time period,
Right,
they're really technical and they're leaning into that, and you're like, well, I hear like this is maybe music for musicians or music for
right,
practicing musicians,
right,
but I'm not sure that this is music for humans, like
right,
for the human experience.
right,
And I think certainly hearing you sing, like it moves me and it moves others, and I think people hear a human thing going on at this point in your development and career. But maybe if they heard you in the practice room or right after you got out of learning a new scale, it might not
right,
have been that. But and I think it's that integration
right.
where through life experiences that like you learn some, I'm sure Billy Hart knows a couple rudiments, right?
Yeah, of
But
course he does. Yeah,
but he doesn't maybe care about cleaning those rudiments up to the point of precision. That's not as interesting to him as getting a
right,
feeling as he's
right.
playing, and I really appreciate that. I think, and I'm sort of thankful in a way for the musicians. I think of like Zigaboo Model Lest, the meters drummer, where like I'm kind of glad he didn't say, "Oh boy, I better play with a click track better,"
Right,
or whatever. And
right,
so he came up in that era where it was like, this is a feel, and this is what it is,
right.
it's like now I play along to him to get that feel into my bones, into my body, so that when I'm expressing, I can express that or something. So I appreciate what you're saying for sure.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
love
we
those
get
Billy Hart songs.
yeah, we get
Yeah,
so involved as jazz musicians in a lot of the technicalities of things and the harmonic possibilities of things. And then
that's
every
right.
once in a while, I have to take a step back. And I forget who said the quote. It was something to the effect of, all you need is three chords and the truth, or something like
Right. Yeah,
that,
that's been attributed many times. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And so
right.
that's what it is. It doesn't have to be some complicated thing to have emotional depth. And emotional content, I think, is something that needs to be as cultivated as our harmonic and theoretical depth and rhythmic depth of understanding, which it's
Absolutely.
not,
Right.
you know.
Right, right.
How
I
do you
think
teach?
that's the quandary, right? It's like, yeah, how do you teach that to someone? People go look at a musician and they go, "Oh, it's so hard, it's so complicated what they're doing." And sometimes it's not even that complicated, but we think it might be because we haven't done it before. So there's that thing
Right,
if you don't know it, but once you start to know a few things about an instrument, you kind of go, it's more about the choices someone's making. Like, what are the
right,
choices they're making and when and how are they responding? Like, just dynamics, for example. Like, that just says a lot about an artist is how are they dynamically interacting with the group in terms of what I mean by that is volume levels, just like, and shaping. Like, how are
right,
they? And I'm thinking that says a lot, but maybe to a novice or to a listener, to a music listener who doesn't play an instrument, they may say, "Well, I like that," and they don't know why.
right.
But we know that there's like an intentionality there that's
Yeah,
happening that's different than the music teacher might teach straight,
right,
a first year student or something. It's more like gets into that element of mastering an art form and being able to,
right.
which doesn't mean you have to be a virtuoso, your musician
Right.
as an instrument.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. I mean,
yeah,
why can Miles Davis play one note and it rips your heart out of your chest? You
right,
play the same note and it does nothing. I
right.
don't mean you. I mean one.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And
Right.
so it's some exercises of getting in touch with our own stories in life. If
Mhm.
like, and I think this is an example from that master class that you spoke of that I gave, where I said, okay, play something happy. And you say, oh, no problem. I'll play major or whatever. And now I say, play something sad. And you're like, oh, no problem. I'll play minor. And then I say, now play jealous. And they have to think, but what's going into your head before you do that? And ideally, what we're doing as far as practicing imagination is concerned is getting in touch with these stories from our life that have those elements, qualities of these various emotional palettes. And then an even further exercise, if we get back to the Miles example of one note, play sorrow, but just one note. Now hold that note and go from happy to sad to sorrowful to jealous to remorseful to with one note. What changes when you're playing that one note? And a lot of it is this intangible thing called intention
Right,
that we can't
right.
necessarily, but these are the imaginative exercises we want to go through. If
Mhm.
we played a solo and our thoughts were directed at something from our own lives, whether that be joy or wonder or whatever it is, and we are specifically thinking about a circumstance that we've been through, a beautiful thing happens where the mind, because it's already heard Bach, it's already heard Charlie Parker, it's already heard this great music, takes over and says, don't worry about the notes, we got that. The subconscious says, we got that. You do the emotion. You think about the emotion and we'll take care of the notes. And if you're not hearing your solo, that what a great thing, right? Now, ideally, you've done your homework and you understand the landscape and your mind is making some good choices. But it's a great exercise then to tape yourself while you're doing that. And you've kind of separated yourself and you've said, subconscious, you take care of the notes. I'm going to think about this terrible story or this wonderful story, this joyous story or this mesmerizing story that happened to me in my life. There's where intention comes into play.
I love that. Yeah. So how would you instruct someone to practice that? Let's just take the one note concept. You said you had this
The one note concept.
Sing one note or play one note and then just simply use your imagination, use your feeling, this is what I'm getting out of it. Maybe this is the exercise, but I'm curious, what would you instruct someone to be able to express that emotion?
Transport yourself to that place in time. I think it's actually harder with one note, with many notes, because we have an opportunity to get into the story. Now, one thing that gets me there is I'm not just saying, let's say it's something about love, and I want to express love over my solo. Now, what I want to do is I don't want to just think love. I want to think a specific story. Let's say I fall in love with the girl. I met this girl. She was so pretty, and I fell in love with her. That's very surface. That is not enough, I don't think, for you to take yourself away from your mind that's saying, now I'm playing these notes. How can we pull ourselves further away? I start thinking about the details. What was she wearing? A sweater? Was there a loose piece of fabric on her sweater? What was the weather like? Did it just rain? Was there a smell of ozone in the air? When my mind starts thinking about those details, I get further away from trying to make music. And now I get to a place of where I'm allowing it to happen without forcing notes out, right? And that's the trick, I think, is to not bog yourself down with details, but get involved with those details, explore those details.
What do you remember? What's vivid? Yeah.
Of the scene, right. But don't just talk surface. Oh, it was a beautiful day. I met this girl. She was pretty. No, not that.
Right.
I met this girl. The sun shone off her hair on the right side of her as she came down the sidewalk, and there was a shadow that went back to the building just so, and it just had rained, and there was a little steam rising from the sidewalk. Now I'm committing to this idea in my mind so much that I can't think about making notes happen, making a solo happen, but I'm allowing those notes to come out.
I love that. That's great. Great advice and thoughts.
That's how you practice it.
Yeah, I like it. Okay.
It's draining.
It's draining. Right,
I have to tell you, after shows where I know I've gotten to that place, I have a hard time speaking to people for about 15 or 20 minutes. I just feel like I've run a marathon and I need to kind of be quiet. And then suddenly I have this great burst of energy.
Yeah, that spent feeling of like, okay, I've just put out something. Right. Maybe this sounds woo-woo as well, but why does music endure? And I know the music business is a whole nother topic, but the music, it seems like, is going to always be around and has been around maybe as long as we have evolved to the point of having a voice. We probably I think we probably sang before we spoke, but it's this thing of like music is saying things that words, as we're talking right now, have trouble explaining. Or have trouble, it's not clear enough. And there's something in music that happens where we can go have a universal shared experience, or I think it's probably a personal experience where we have this experience together, witnessing it, and we're like, wow, I'm moved somehow.
Right. Absolutely.
Right? The magic.
I think we can go further with your question as to why are we compelled to make music? Right. And so maybe there's something very, very wrong with us. And we need this psychological place to keep ourselves sane. I've got to get it out of me. Maybe we're seers and we're able to tap into these emotions and express them through sound that have nothing to do with lyrics, as you said. But then we get involved in this symbiotic relationship. Why do people go see live music then? And what is the job of the musician then at that point as a seer? That we're in this place to help the audience, but they're there to help us as well in the symbiotic relationship, where we say, hey man, I'm recalling an experience. This happened to me and it really hurt me, and I'm emotionally committed to it because I'm revisiting this real experience that happened to me that relates to the lyrics somehow. And I go there and I get done, and the audience, some people in the audience are like, that happened to me too. Now I don't feel alone, right? We have this kind of psychological exchange, psychiatrist-patient exchange, and the audience says, oh, that happened to you? Clap, clap, clap. Go on, tell us more about your issues. and we go
Yeah.
on to the next emotional hang up, and we tell them about that, or we're telling them about joy or whatever it is.
It does.
But
It can be also very, yeah, joyful. There's that's also, I've had this experience now singing and playing a bit where I'm playing and I feel a reaction. Maybe I don't even hear the clapping yet, but you can just almost like there's a, they move with you, or maybe they don't even move. It's just a vibe. You just feel like, oh, this is connecting what I'm doing. And you feel a connection with the audience that's very different than any sort of connection that we might experience in just everyday life where you're like walking around, you're talking to someone at the grocery store or whatever.
right.
But there's something about like, whoa, we're vibing here. Like we're humans and we're having
Yeah.
a shared experience. And I know you do this, you deliver this. I've seen you perform. It's amazing. You're improvising this, but maybe, or what are your thoughts on that? Is that,
Yeah. So
am I describing that in a way you would describe
absolutely.
it? Okay.
Absolutely. So I had a gig within the last year in New York where they just installed a new lighting system and they weren't able to quite get it working. It was the first night since they installed it. There's
Well,
this
lucky
club called
you.
Yeah,
Lucky you.
called
You're the,
Mesro. Actually, it was.
oh, okay. Okay, good.
I was excited to play. I was playing with people I loved. They were great musicians. I had some new music and some new charts I wanted to try out. And the bass player just flew in from France, really great bassist. So we didn't have a rehearsal. We're just showing up and we're reading music. And I realized the lights aren't working. I say, we got to get started because in New York, you got one show, then you got a show right after it, then you got a show. So I'm like, you're robbing me of my time. I want to play. I said to the guys, forget about the lights being where you want them to be. We're just going to go. And so we started, and so the lights it's very dim in the whole club, which is actually kind of a cool thing. And we start playing, and I'm thinking, oh my God, the bass player is completely lost. Oh my God, the piano player is completely lost. And I look over, and the bass player's face is about an inch away from the music. He can't see the music. He can't see the chart. He can't see the roadmap. These
Oh,
are
no.
some new charts, new arrangements. I'm dying. I'm thinking, oh my God, this is the worst thing that could have happened to me. But I'm driven. The piano player, same thing. His face is right up against the music, and he's getting lost and wrong chords. I'm thinking this is. We get done with the first tune. The audience is clapping like crazy. I'm like, there's a vibe in here. There's something going on. We get done with the gig, and there were more mistakes and more miscues of any gig that I've ever played. And I've never been regaled by an audience like I was that night because there was just this energy, this vibe. They were rooting for us. We were into it. We still love each other as human beings on the music stage, which is a beautiful thing that we're rooting for each other. On the subway home, we ran into people who were at the show and they just said that was the most amazing thing we've ever seen. And I'm next to the bass player and we're just like, I guess, but
Right.
we were joyful and we felt this
Yeah.
thing. There was
Yeah.
a thing. And it
That's
didn't matter,
That's amazing. I love
Yeah.
that. I love that on
Didn't
so many
matter.
levels. Like, I wrote a book on self-doubt, right? And one of my
Right.
examples there is, that sometimes we think we sucked, we blew it,
Mhm.
whatever, but you don't ever do a caveat, by the way, because
Right.
you ruin it for the audience who just
Right.
enjoyed something and they
Right.
don't know what you intended to do and they got their own interpretation and it's not
Right.
wrong. It's theirs.
Right.
So you basically
Mindset.
yeah, you basically stayed with the intention of doing your best to deliver a show. And I think people forgive mistakes like that, or they may not even hear them. To them, it's like, that was,
Right.
wow, that was so cool. Right. I mean,
It
Miles
became
Davis
big.
famously under-rehearsed the groups. I think that
Right.
was, right? Part of
Right.
it is he wanted that, whoa, here we
Right.
go, and leaning in with the ears, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And doing that as much as you can, there comes a confidence of being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I have a gig next week, the day before I leave for a 6-week tour. And more than a gig in a long time, I'm afraid of the gig because I'm playing with the guitarist. I'm playing with Ari Honig on drums,
Oh, wow.
Lucas Curtis, who's a great bassist. But there's a kind of a phenom right now. There's always a phenom in New York,
There's
or
obviously
everywhere
one in
there's
New
always a
York. Yeah,
phenom.
right. Right.
There's a kid here, young man, who is just a phenomenal, prodigious guitarist named Emmanuel Michael. He's been playing with Frizzell, with Gilad Hexelman. He's at the Blue Note this weekend, I believe. Everyone wants him as a sideman. I just saw him with Greg Hutchinson. And
Uh-huh.
so he's on this gig, but he's too busy for a rehearsal. So I'm trying to imagine how he's going to interpret whatever charts I choose. And I'm afraid of what's going to happen, but I think that fear is going to lend itself to creativity. And so I'm
Yeah.
not worried about it because it's a circumstance I've been in many, 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 many times. And I look forward to it, but there's still a fear there. There's
Yeah.
still
Well,
an
that
adrenaline
that
rush.
fear is, there's the healthy fear, right? Of like,
Yeah, yeah. I'm
that's
prepared.
Right, but it's
unprepared,
not
but
the paralyzing fear that then
no, no,
are
no.
shriveled up in a ball. You're like it's heightening your intention, heightening your awareness that, hey,
Listening. Yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna listen a little differently. I'm gonna maybe prepare a little differently. I'm also gonna allow for some things to happen, but all right, great. That's beautiful. So just to be respectful of your time, I want you to tell people where to check you out and how.
So the platform, you can find it on the geniusjamtracks.com website. They
Right.
have courses listed on there, so you can find the platform there. I teach privately Zoom as well as in person. And then this summer, I have uh, two teaching camps, teaching at a music school in Moscow, teaching in
Wow.
Greece for a week. And it's combination usually of teaching and performing for a week in Greece and then also in Slovakia. And then I'm on tour throughout all of those countries as well as
Wow.
Turkey this summer. So I'm about ready to head out for a 6 week. Don't get to sleep in your own bed. Don't get to cook in your own kitchen. Don't get to pet your own
Oh,
dog.
right.
Sacrifice of
Right.
being on the road. But, sometimes you have to give up things you love
Yeah.
to do other
Yeah.
things you love.
Right. It's that
So
compromise.
that's what's happened. Yeah.
Live musician. Okay, great. Wow, that's awesome. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for taking some time out and
My
talking with
pleasure,
me.
Dave.
And I'm
Thanks for
gonna
having me.
thanks so much for giving us these tidbits of wisdom and sharing your experience, your artistry. And I wish you luck on the road and
Thanks,
good luck
Dave.
teaching.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.